So, when you begin your piece of work, what we should always do before we set out to do anything else is start with an undertone. I already have this kind of undertone. This is just a mix of colors that I had on my palette a couple weeks ago, and I sometimes I'll just swash them all over all over the little canvas and just wipe them all off, and that leaves a tone. This is sort of a generalized warm greenish tone, right? So the point to doing that is so many of the time when you see paintings, you can often see through the grain of the canvas. Canvas, if you feel it, has a rough texture, right? It's basically a heavy-duty fabric stretched over either a thin heavy-duty cardboard palette, not palette, hardboard sort of board, or they're stretched over a frame of boards, right? But either way, you can many times see this grain coming through. And that's okay, that's perfectly acceptable. I tend to like seeing that. But because of that, we don't want to leave it white. Because if you see that white coming through on paint you've already put on and it's just white, that's a lost opportunity. Typically, when we paint anything, we can see a little bit of the undertone of what was there before. So it's beneficial to either set a warm tone or a cool tone to your painting by just putting a quick underwash over the whole thing. Like I say, this is just a kind of a randomized warm green that doesn't really have any other meaning other than it was just there. Okay, so first of all, I am going to paint something on this thing, and what I'm going to start with is I'm going to pronounce my intention with this whole thing. Not with my words, but with what I paint. I want to set a series of strokes down that automatically tell the viewer what I'm going to start with, what I'm going to be painting. So I'm going to start with some darks. And let me see, what should I paint? Okay, I'm just going to do something. We'll just start with something, okay? Something like, I don't know, furry maybe. Furry is nice. And this dripping effect is from paint thinner. Paint, when you get it right out of the tube, typically isn't necessarily of an acceptable consistency right away. It tends to be very thick right off the bat, right? So to get things moving along, just use paint thinner. You're just gonna give your brush a little dip in your Silicoil jar, which should be full of paint thinner, and that will give you a much more fluid consistency to your painting that will allow you to work much faster, more fluidly, okay? So one thing I don't necessarily want to do when I'm starting a painting is do lines. We don't want lines to start with. Excuse me, I just had to sneeze, didn't I? Okay. You don't necessarily want to begin with lines, okay? I mean, it's okay to begin with lines. I know a lot of really great painters that do start with lines, but... oh, geez. Nice. Okay. But what you really ought to start with first, before you go into that line work, if you do line work at all, is your lights and darks. Lights and darks, right? This is automatically going to set your intention. Your whole tone for the work is your intention, what you clearly intend to do. Everything you put, all these strokes you put on here are obvious, they're intentional. They look like scribbles, right? But it looks like I very much intended for them to look like that. I very much intended for them to look like scribbles, right? And that doesn't change the fact that they're scribbles, but it doesn't look like I worked very hard at it. It looks effortless. It looks like I knew exactly what I was doing when I put them there. So therefore, they can't be wrong. It's kind of a weird backwards way of thinking, but it kind of works in a lot of fields in just general life. What did they say? Fake it till you make it. Isn't that what it is? It's kind of like that. Pretend you know what you're doing. Chances are, it might even look like you know what you're doing. All right, so this is kind of my I don't know if you can tell what it is already, but it's probably pretty obvious. Right? Looks like it could be a pooch. Right? So that's typically my intentionality. That's okay. Everybody can tell what I'm going to paint. Oh, it's a dog, right? It's clearly a dog, right? Looks like a dog to me anyway. Okay. So after you have your basic set of intentional strokes down, your intentional set of your series of lights and darks, mostly starting out with darks to start with. You can see that I was very heavy on the darks in this part. You can maybe see where I intend to have many of my lights, right? So after I get that part done, the next part I want to do is I'm going to focus on my background quite a bit. Because my background is what this is setting on. I don't want to get this dog's head perfectly right, the way I want it, and then I have to go back on the background and fix that. Because when I go back to the background, look what happens. It's messy, right? I can't just go like this the whole painting, right? Where I'm going like, oh, ever so carefully, trying to avoid what I put down, right? So after this part is down, I just really want to go through here quickly and put something down for my background. The last thing I want to do is be fidgety widgety about trying to avoid messing up what I did before. This is a very arbitrary very arbitrary sort of set of strokes of painting strokes that I just did to sort of clarify, not only to me but anybody who might be seeing it, what this is going to be. And this is my blueprint now. This is what I'm sticking with, okay? If I didn't have this, maybe I wouldn't necessarily know where I was going the whole time unless I had like maybe a reference photo, right? And you should always have a reference photo. Ugh, cats. Okay, so I have... I'm just gonna get some background nonsense in here. Background nonsense. And the idea is in the first couple sessions of your painting, you really want to get your background the way you want it right away. You don't want to spend a whole lot of time fidgeting with this kind of thing, right? I mean, what I typically want to accomplish right away in a background is setting an atmospheric tone, right? An atmospheric tone that isn't distracting. It allows the viewer to focus on the subject, and at the same time supports the subject in color. Typically a neutral is going to be most supportive in color. So I just started with sort of your atypical gray, although this was just a mix of white and black that was on my palette, and often that's not the best gray to use. Just a simple mix of white and black. And we'll go over some grays a little later as well. But so the next thing I want to do is go back into my dog. Right? My dog, he has some fuzzies, man. He's one fuzzy monster. And I'm going to put some white around where his skull goes around. He's got some white down here. Fur is typically a difficult thing to work. It takes a little while for sure. But gonna get it going, and then oh geez, what a mess. Okay. And now this is the part where I like to start figuring out where my important parts are. I know that he has a nose. I know that he has ear holes. And then, beyond that, what I'd like to do take this whole thing a little further, start adding some warmer tones into his coat. Portraits are always nice when they're warm, right? It's also warm and fuzzy feeling. My stupid cats, Jesus. And then I'm just going to start changing the overall tone of this by adding some warm features into the fur. All right, so, and if this is as far as you get doing any painting, I mean, if you're doing a dog or whatever you're doing, or landscape or anything, you know, he has a little cute blaze like that, so I just threw that in, sorry. Then this is fine. If this is as far as you get in your first or even second class time, that's fine. This is perfectly acceptable. What you should have done by your second time in class is a viewer should be able to look at your painting on the wall and say, I know exactly what that student is going to paint. I know exactly what that is. And I can tell exactly what the overall tone is going to be like. And, you know, maybe they're wrong. Nobody really knows what it's going to be like. I mean, but they should feel like that. There should be a sense of certainty in what you're proceeding with. And, yeah. At some point we're going to talk about how to work a wet painting. But we'll save that for another video.